Commission to order on Tuesday, July 21st at 7 o'clock. Roll call. Paul Arbuckle present.
Lou Yang present.
Alan Ige present.
John Eads present.
So we're just missing Deshar and Fred
Deshar
then, right?
Present.
Oh, there he is. Okay, look at that fancy microphone now.
Yeah.
Okay, approval of the agenda. Any corrections or additions?
Mr. Chair, staff does not have any amendments to the agenda as presented.
I need approval for the agenda.
Move to approve it as presented.
What did I do now? I've done something over here.
Okay, that's
Second approval.
motion by Deshar and second by Alan.
Yeah.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Abstention.
One abstention
Lou?
from Lou.
And just a point of clarification, this was the agenda, not the minutes.
All right.
Not the minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, then the approval of the minutes. Any corrections or additions?
Chair and commission staff does not have any amendments to the minutes as presented.
Anybody catch anything, see anything? I didn't. Need
Nope.
approval?
Move to approve it as presented.
There's been a motion by Deshar, second by John. All those in favor?
Aye.
One abstention.
Abstention.
Lou?
Yes.
Okay. We were just practicing.
Just practicing.
Public hearing, capital improvement plan 2021 to 2025. Staff?
Thank you, Chair and Commission. Annually, at your meeting in July, the Planning Commission has historically reviewed components of the capital improvement plan and asked questions of staff and made a recommendation to the City Council on the plan itself. Tonight, we have Finance Director Ellen Paulseth available here to present the capital improvement plan and answer questions of the Commission and lead us through a dialogue. So with that, I will hand it off to Ms. Paulseth.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, Commission members and Mr. Martin. Bear with me tonight as I try to get to share my screen. In your packet materials, you will have kind of a pared down listing of things compared to what we've done in previous years. A couple of different reasons. We're trying to just focus on what the items that the Commission is responsible for. And also, we're in the middle of changing software packages for our capital improvement projects. So we kind of are at the end of one software subscription and beginning another. So we have all the projects in the old format. So what you have is a list of projects that might in some way potentially intersect with the comprehensive plan. They may or they may not. Mr. Martin has probably made an assessment of that already, but I included anything that I thought might be of interest to you. So for instance, we did not include anything about the city's fleet equipment purchases, those types of things, just land and buildings. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen and see if I can get this PowerPoint to go. Can everyone see that?
Yep.
Yes.
Let me give it a shot, get it going. Okay. Is that still, everyone can see that?
Yes.
Yep.
Correct.
And everyone can hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so tonight this is actually a public hearing, so it's part of the process that we go through in order to be able to bond for these projects next year. I do believe City Public Works Director Steve Love is also going to be on the call tonight to answer any questions that you may have about the projects. I'm not sure if he's present just yet, but he was planning on being present tonight. So basically what your role is tonight is to ensure that these projects are in alignment with the comprehensive plan and your other planning processes. So if you find that something does not align with your work, then this is where we are looking for your input so that we can bring it back to the city council. So I'll just go through a very quick overview of how we do this process. On an annual basis, we're constantly in a mode where we're identifying capital needs. We then analyze those needs in the context of the city's long-range strategic planning processes. We then look for funding sources, and if we find funding sources, we insert them into the 5-year CIP, bring that to the Plan Commission for review. The City Council has a public hearing as well, and then fund those on an annual basis in our annual capital budget. And then in the following year, we actually implement the CIP and do the projects one by one. And the City Council goes through an approval process for each of those projects, even though they've already approved the plan. Just very quickly, several methods of financing are involved. For vehicles and equipment, you won't be considering any of that tonight, but we do most of that on a pay-as-you-go basis. Building improvements, we do have building funds, and we utilize debt. The same with streets and infrastructure. We have other revenue sources, but we do utilize debt. So that's part of this process tonight, is that the public has an input in how the city is utilizing debt. Park dedication fees are our primary source of revenues for park improvements, but we have also utilized debt as well. So tax increment financing typically involves some sort of debt as well. So this is the part where the public gets to make comments about how the city is utilizing debt. The council has a number of principles that we follow when we analyze projects. So they let us know what their priorities are on an annual basis. Often it's road projects. So for 2021, the priority is a fire station. There'll be a new north fire station under construction, hopefully, if the funding comes through. There also will be some road projects, but we'll be funding those locally. We won't be issuing debt for the first time in our road projects, as we do have a large building project with the North Fire Station. That project's been on the books for many, many years, and finally getting to that. We will continue to work on debt reduction strategies. Every year we are bringing the level of outstanding debt down, and that's in accordance with the goals that the City Council has established. So by doing that, we are leveraging local government aid, pay-as-you-go, any other revenue sources other than debt for our street improvements. We continue to utilize debt, but not for 2021. Constantly looking for that balance. Also trying to ensure that there is some economic development activities without going over the city's goals for debt. So tonight you're having this meeting, July 21st. Is that the right date? And from there on, we'll have a CIP workshop with the City Council, and we hope to get before the Park Board as well. We've had one CIP workshop with the Council. We want to try to revisit the projects, and then the City Council will have a hearing in December and also adopt it in December. So this is your opportunity to give your input on how it might affect the comprehensive plan or your other planning processes. This will be a document for 5 years, but it's updated annually, and the adoption is required for us to issue debt for these projects. There's $73 million in projects. As you can see, it's primarily street improvements. I suspect that most of these street improvements will not be in conflict at all with the comprehensive plan, because they are primarily overlays and reconstructions, but I'm sure that Mr. Martin will have some comments on that later. So about 62% street improvements in this particular 5-year plan. It's a little bit less because we have 16% in building improvements, so about 11.8 million. Most of that, close to 11 million of that being that fire station for 2021, as you can see. that 10.8 million. So that is really the big change. Otherwise, primarily street projects, and there will be some park improvements to try to keep the parks up to the standard that the city council would like to see them and the public would like to see them. It's been determined that they need to spend about $1 million a year just to maintain what we have. So that's a little bit difficult. They put some park projects on the back burner for right now because of the economic situation, but they are still in the 5-year plan, and we are still doing projects with revenue sources other than debt and taxes, like park dedication fees. So still park projects in the plan, just some of them on hold for right now. So this is the point that Mr. Love was going to discuss, the particular road projects. I don't know if he's on the line tonight. Mr. Martin, do you know if he is?
He's not on the call right now.
Okay.
Sent him a message saying if he was having trouble accessing, but
okay. He may have gotten tied up with another meeting. He's a very, very busy man. So since we've gone through this a couple of times and we've built this together, I do have an error. It should say 2021 to 2025 on the title there. So I will update that. But there, in that 5-year period, there are almost 21 miles of street reconstruction. And that is almost 16% of the total city streets. I think we have roughly about 135 miles of streets. And so that is 4.3 miles over what our last year's schedule was. So always looking for ways to add mileage to our street improvements. We're doing that with franchise fee revenue, local government aid, municipal state aid for streets, always looking for ways, non-debt financing mechanisms to improve the streets. And one of the things that we've been doing in the last few years, which has been very popular with the residents, is spot paving. And so that's basically a temporary fix. It's not like as good as an overlay. This is where Mr. Love would be better at explaining it. It's not a reconstruct and not a full overlay, but it's a temporary fix. If we know there's a problem in a certain area and we know we're not going to get to that street in the next few years, the crews have been going out and doing spot paving. And it's been very, very popular with the residents because it really gives them some relief until the city can get out there and reconstruct or overlay the road. We've been spending $80,000 to $100,000 a year on that, and that's primarily coming from franchise fee revenue and other sources, non-debt related. So that's been a very, very popular program, and people really, really appreciate it. So for 2021, what's coming up with street projects? 2.35 miles in the Montana, Nebraska area, if you're familiar with the geography of the city, Montana, Nebraska streets. That's all being done with $1.8 million of local funding. So we have that money set aside in the bank from franchise fees and local government aid. We won't be borrowing money for that. So that's a good feeling. That's a pavement project, so it will not be a complete reconstruct. The same with the South Crest Ferndale area. Again, that's 3 miles, 2.3 million. That will also be local funding. I am almost certain that that commission members know where these streets are located. So I don't have a map. Mr. Love would probably be better at explaining where they're located, but I'm pretty certain that you're familiar with the city's streets and geography. Also looking at getting some state bridge funds to fix or replace a bridge over the Sterling Street Bridge over Fish Creek. So that's a non-street related, but a bridge related project that's pretty sizable. So 5.35 miles of street projects next year, primarily pavement. So other major projects in this 5-year period is the City Council is still considering a redevelopment in the Gladstone area. And so at this time, we're still looking for partners developers and funding sources, but it's very much on the radar of the City Council. There will be some park upgrades. We're not doing a lot this year or next year, but there will be some park upgrades in the five-year plan. Those detail sheets are included in your packet. Some open space improvements, primarily things like the Nature Center boardwalk and the priority area. The Nature Center itself probably won't be getting improved, but much of the open space programs that were included in the CIP, and those are also described in your packet. Obviously, the North Fire Station construction, we discussed that. That's a very large project, replacing the old station. Sewer force main improvement in the Maple Hills area. If Mr. Love comes on the line, he can describe that in a little better detail than I can. That was one that came up kind of late. There was a failure in the infrastructure, so there will be that correction made in 2021. And then the city will be working in conjunction with Ramsey County on some other projects. It'll be primarily funded by the county, but they may be of interest to the Planning Commission, and that would be the Rice Street project, the County Road D project, and the White Bear Avenue and Larpenteur project. So that concludes my presentation, and we are looking for input on whether or not these projects will conform with the comprehensive plan and your planning processes. Any input that you have on the 2021 projects, or any other questions that you may have.
I have a question. This is John Eads. One of the things as we're looking at this as a planning is, where does this planning intersect with particularly street, with speed mitigation, especially if there's decreased law enforcement, and then also the element of smart streets and that initiative of making streets more available, and how all these different incentives would work together. I think particularly in some of these plans where it's residential, does the plan involve that element of using new ways of building streets, that street mitigation is built into the design of the roadway if possible?
That's an excellent question. Mr. Love would answer it much better than me. So I know that the Planning Commission has a number of street planning processes. You mentioned smart streets. There are a number of other ones as well. Green Step. I'm trying to think of the one that he talks about a lot. Maybe Mr. Martin.
Living.
Yep, living streets.
Living streets, that's it. So all of those things go into the planning of the street reconstruction projects. The living streets one is one that is mentioned every time. So I know that those are considered. Since Mr. Love is not on the line, Mr. Martin, did you want to expand on that at all?
Yeah, a couple things.
Hey, Mike, before you start, I'm just going to redefine my question maybe a little bit better. It's the element of, where are we at, since, the people who are best to understand their streets are the people who live in those areas. Where in that process does the community come in? I think the community coming in at the beginning or very early elements of these planning processes is an important element of making the best plan, the community, that individual small community that it serves.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. I will just give a brief comment and then turn it over to Mr. Martin. I do know that they have many public meetings, neighborhood meetings, before these street projects are designed and through the design process. And what they do discuss those components. I'll turn it over to Mr. Martin. He can probably speak to that better than I can.
Sure, Chair and Commission. A couple points, kind of big picture first is the planning really starts at the comprehensive plan. So there is a transportation chapter, and that talks about big picture, living streets, what type of communities we want to build through our streets and transportation network. So that's where the directives come. So when engineering staff develops those plans for rebuilds of neighborhood streets, they start with that as a premise. Now, to get more smaller scale, like Commissioner Eads was mentioning, and Finance Director Paulseth mentioned, there are neighborhood meetings, and they do start early enough to the point where engineering staff works to solve issues that are localized, so localized as flooding in an individual's yard, and sidewalk should be on the south side instead of the north side, or curbing issues. So they do get in front of the neighborhood early enough where individual issues that have been known about in the neighborhood for many years are identified and addressed. So we're able to balance kind of that long-term big picture planning that we do every 10 years in our comprehensive plan and where we want to go, to solving parcel by parcel issues as best the city can while they're going in with the street project. So I think, there's not an engineer on this call, but from what I see, we kind of balance both the big picture long-term planning with how to provide, immediate relief to a homeowner on what they're seeing day to day on their street.
And I do think that's very important, Mike, and thank you for going into detail, because one of the elements of the fact that homeowners are assessed fees, the sooner the homeowner feels for that process, the more buy-in as best you can, that you're going to have some financial expenditure so you can start making some plans so that the homeowners in those neighborhoods have just as much of an opportunity to say, hey, I need to lay out $100 a month because there's going to be an assessment on my property in 2023 because they're rebuilding the road in front of my house. I think that's just a good transparency issue for the Planning Commission.
I have a question regarding the Nature Center boardwalk. Has the Nature Center been closed? So is that still going to be on the agenda for creating a new boardwalk or improvements on the boardwalk?
Yes, thank you for that question. The Nature Center facility has been closed, but the grounds are open. And the City Council does intend to maintain the boardwalk into the future. They are still sort of deliberating as to just exactly how the timing will occur on some of those projects. But the Nature Center boardwalk and some of the open space improvements are still in the plan. The timing of them could change.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I have a question. My question is that as we are still talking about street improvements and reconstructions, I'm just wondering, who has the priority on the street overlay or the street reconstruction, especially when you are in partnership with the county?
In partnership with the county?
Yeah.
Only when the county owns the road.
Yes.
So for the Rice Street and the Larpenteur, those projects, the city may sometimes have to contribute. It might be streetscaping or something that the city often will work in partnership with the county, even though the county is providing the majority of the funding. So we do that quite often, but typically when the county owns the road.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, what determines when it is to be done?
What determines when it is? Mr. Love would probably be better to answer that than me. He usually works with the county and determines when to fit those projects into the plan. Usually the county doesn't give us a lot of notice. I maybe shouldn't say that, but oftentimes, we work them in at the last minute. But so we're thankful that we do have some notice on the projects that are in there now.
Yeah, I'm asking that question. I can see how that ties into Ed's question about the notification of the residents, in terms of what is going to happen. If the city doesn't have the upper hands or determine when the road is going to be done, and the county kind of hanging on, and the city has notified the residents that, this is the time it's going to be done, it can create some kind of issues. That is why I'm asking that question.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. Oftentimes, the county, depending on the level of contribution that the city is doing, the county will handle the notifications with the residents and the neighborhood meetings. and the city isn't as involved. We're present, but not as involved. So it really kind of depends on what the project is. Mr. Martin, did you have anything more to add to that?
Yeah, Chair and Commission, what comes to mind is like when it's been a few years now, but County Road D and White Bear, when those improvements were made several years ago up by the mall, as Ms. Paulseth mentioned, Ramsey County completely led that public process. The city did step in and because it wanted certain street lamps and like the Maplewood logo or the entryway on D and White Bear. So when there's things that we want above and beyond what the county would do in a basic project, that's where the city gets involved. But they, on a county street and county roads, they are completely in charge or, responsible for that public outreach. Now, think back to the north end as we develop our plans, there could be potential for further collaboration with the county, say like on Beam or further on D and White Bear, as different projects come to fruition. So we'll need to leverage our relationships with the county. But if it's just simply a straight like mill and overlay, the county is going to deal with that and any residents that happen to live on that road. What Maplewood strives for on our local roads is, having an excellent process that residents can be involved with. And then, all we can kind of do is nudge the county in that direction when it's an opportunity to do so.
Okay.
They have a grading system on how they determine what roads are going to be replaced too by the deterioration and how bad cracks and things are. They have like a spreadsheet that they determine when the road should be replaced, and that's kind of how Maplewood does it too. The category 1, 2, or 3.
That's correct, Chair and Commission. It's called a PCI rating, and the rating goes from 1 to 100. And oftentimes, the city streets that are being reconstructed or reclaimed are under 40, sometimes barely over 30. So sometimes the roads can be in pretty bad shape by the time we can get them into the cycle. So the spot paving program has been really helpful in helping to just get a little bit more mileage out of those roads until we can get to them.
So if you're driving down your road and your car falls into a hole, your road's ready to be replaced.
Well, the fact is that is why I'm wondering that these overlay or reconstructions by the city, are they under warranty?
There is a contractor's warranty, Chair and Commission. I do not have the specifics on that. It might be a year. I think it really depends. Usually the contracts are open for quite some time and there's a punch list and it takes a while to final out the very final payment. But there typically is some sort of warranty, but I can't tell you exactly what the time limit on that is. Mr. Love could have expounded on that a little bit. I'm not sure if you have any more information on that, Mr. Martin.
Chair and Commission, I do not. I can follow up with that kind of question because we can follow up with Mr. Love. It's not necessarily germane to the big picture planning through the capital improvement plan itself. But the more specific questions, if there's a couple kind of remainders hanging out there, I can be sure to follow up in the next meeting.
Okay. So let's deal with the presence. Things like COVID-19, how much does it affect CI people?
Well, interestingly enough, Chair and Commission, it has. So the road project that we're currently working on on County Road B is being impacted by COVID-19. So there had to be some modifications done to the project in order to do some inspections and types of things like that, to go into people's homes and do some inspections using the right protocol and the right procedures. So we are actually able to apply for a federal grant to cover those added costs for that County Road B project.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
The question I had is on the road street development there. This year in 2021 was 5 million, and then 22 was 11 million. Is that because of the focus on the fire station? Is that why there's that big difference?
Yes, correct, Chair and Council or Commission. Basically, the roads that we are doing in 2021 are what we call reclamation. If I'm using, so they're more of a pavement overlay as opposed to a reconstruction. The reconstruction projects are a lot more expensive because it involves the replacement of some of the other infrastructure, such as sewer lines and curb and gutter, water lines, those kinds of things. So what we're doing in 2021 is just projects that are primarily just overlaying the pavement. So that's primarily the difference between the cost of those two.
Okay, and also I noticed on there too, the cost per, if we're doing 5.3 miles, the rate is almost $780,000. Is that, I know you wouldn't know that, but does that sound accurate that it's almost $800,000 per mile? Does that sound right?
It does.
Okay.
For a reconstruction project, it does.
Okay. Now, does this take in the rate of inflation too? When we figure out 5 years, like what was it last year? The calculation, it was, we're at 73 million this year. The 5 years calculations, did that change much?
Yes, Chair and Commission, it did. The engineers do calculate in an inflationary rate for the projects occurring in the outer years. In other words, 2022 to 2025. I will tell you that annually they update those costs, and we typically see them go up more than what their anticipated rate of inflation was. Construction costs tend to be, especially road construction, tend to be higher than normal inflation. So we typically have to upgrade those costs on an annual basis upward. Yes.
So if we were at 73 million with the 5-year projection, what was it last year? The 5-year projection, was it about the same? I mean, I know there are improvements, but was it kind of close? Or
excuse me? Yes, I believe it was between 68 and 70, if I recall right, Chair and Commission. There was a considerable increase also in the North Fire Station cost. That project had been in the CIP for many years, and there was only a very preliminary cost estimate. And by the time we got the final cost estimate, it was several million more. So that's part of the reason for the increase over last year's CIP as well. Construction costs on the roads and on the fire station facility.
Makes sense. Yeah. Now the other thing on one of the capital improvements was at Harvest Park, they only allotted $300,000. That seems pretty low to me, because some of the other ones are in $1 million and more than that. How do they come up with such a low number on that?
It depends on what the park board is planning on doing, Chair and Commission. Sometimes it's just a matter of replacing the playground, or it could be, fixing some pavement on the parking lot. I don't know. I believe there is a detail sheet in the packet on that that I could take a look at. Mr.
Yeah, it seemed like a lot of stuff for that amount.
Chair and Commission, the Harvest Park is for the creation and implementation of the Harvest Park Master Plan. So the key word there is creation. So they still need to create the master plan itself, and that's part of where that $300,000 will be. So that plan would identify potential future improvements that need to be made to that park that would come in further budget requests, or not budget requests, but CIP requests that would be reflected in future years. So at this point, it's just looking at what needs to be done, essentially, and that's kind of the beginning component, is my understanding.
So we're not paying somebody $300,000 to give us an opinion on it, right?
No, that's not the entirety of what that cost would be there for. That's a portion of that would go towards the planning work itself, but it's also not enough, as you highlighted, to implement a reconfiguration of ball fields, picnic shelter, a new playground, So
Mayor and Commission, I do believe that the master plan would be under $50,000, or at least in that area. Once the master plan is done, then they would identify what the priorities are. So often what they do is they determine, and when I say they, I mean the park board and the staff, determine how much funding is available in the park fund. And have allocated, this amount, $300,000 that they're willing to spend on this park. So even though they haven't clearly identified what projects are going to be done first, they've identified that they would like to spend $300,000 on the master plan and some of the projects. I believe that's what the intent was.
And eventually they might budget more down when they determine it needs more money, right? Because that doesn't seem like enough.
I believe so.
Right, okay. So I guess the other question, when you're talking about the $50,000 to have them look at it, we had that done at the Nature Center, and that's what they came up with in here then is what needs to be, the improvements that need to be done there? Because we spent the $50,000 to have them look at that, right?
That's correct. A lot of what is included was part of the Nature Center master plan. Some of those priorities may change now that the city has actually closed the facility. So the city council may be reprioritizing some of those.
So, question: Is the definition of park improvement, does it include or exclude some of the adjacent lakes, cleaning, fishing decks, and all that stuff?
So, Chair and Commission, the lakes, the cleaning of the ponds and lakes is typically not done with park funding. Typically, that's done with our environmental fund. So, I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does.
Thank you.
Yeah, there was one on here. I think wasn't it like $100,000 or something to do something.
Yes, and that will be done with environmental utility funds.
Right.
Yeah.
I've got a question,
Go ahead, Lou.
just kind of maybe financial for the city in general with, the current COVID issues, rents not being paid, things like that. Has it been studied of the effects on property tax payments and how that kind of funnels down to the city? And if the city is short, are we going to look for financing through debt and things like that?
Okay, so thank you, Chair and Commission, for that question. That is an excellent question. So as you know, first half property taxes have already been collected. The county did give a 60-day grace period. Most residents did not utilize that grace period. Most residents did pay their first half tax. I do believe that at May 15th, the county said we were between 95 and 90, I think it was 96% collected. And that was at May 15th. So on July 15th, the remaining taxpayers who hadn't paid by May 15th were able to pay without penalty. We're going to be getting a report from the county on that by the end of the week. So we will know at least for the first half, but we are very close to being 100% collected. I think it will be around 98. So while we're seeing a small amount of delinquency, nothing to be too alarmed about, or nothing that we would not have expected. Even in a normal year, we might expect a 1% delinquency. Remains to be seen yet what the second half collections will look like. Often what happens is homeowners will have an escrow, and their bank or mortgage lender will ensure that the taxes get paid, because if people don't pay their property taxes, they lose their property, and there's usually a mortgage interest. And often the same is true of commercial properties. So not paying taxes can be kind of devastating, and so typically we don't see a lot of delinquencies, but in years like this, yes, that's where we're going to see some later payments. And so we're watching that very closely. What we're more concerned about is property tax petitions. So we have large commercial property owners who may petition to have their values lowered, and that would also lower their taxes. And so the city would have to take a hit in property tax revenue because of that. So we are experiencing some of that. We do plan for that, though. We do plan for a certain level of delinquencies and a certain level of petitions. So at this point, what we're seeing is within the expectations that we had or that we had planned for. So we're hopeful that that trend continues for the rest of this year. We may have to plan for more delinquencies next year. That's something that we're talking with the council about right now.
That's the point.
What is the total amount of funds that we receive from the taxes like that? How much is that?
The city property tax levy, chair and commission, is about $23 million. So the city spends between 70 and 80 million per year. So there are lots of other revenue sources as well. There's utility fees, there's intergovernmental revenue, franchise fees, charges for services. But 23 million is about what we've been collecting in property taxes.
Now, the other question I had here was on page 24 on the park maintenance and reinvestment. There's numbers on here all are different. It says the total project cost is 5 million, and then the justification identifies recommendations as 7 million. And then when you look on the expenditures, it's only 4 million. I guess I'm confused on why all these numbers are all so different.
That's correct, Chair and Commission. The park system plan is more of a long-term plan, and the CIP is only 5 years, and so the City Council is trying to spend $1 million a year. Some of that will be borrowed and some of that will be funds that we have on hand. So there's a lot of reorganization going on right now with the projects that were in the master plan until this the economy looks a little bit better. So there definitely are $7 million of improvements, but whether or not they all get done in this 5 years is another question. They probably will not.
I think you meant $1 million every other year, I think is what
yeah, $1 million every other year, but there's also other projects that we're utilizing current funding for that we're counting as part of that contribution. So
okay. So they need 7 million and the project cost is 5 million, so they have to put on hold a couple of things.
Yeah.
That's what you're, okay. Okay.
The reason that said the project cost was 5 million is because at one point the city had committed, and I should maybe go in and change that, but the city had committed $1 million per year, and with the debt reduction plan, we just were not able to do that. And then when we're dealing with the recession, we moved it to $1 million every other year, and we're counting some of the existing funding that we're using in some of the other parks from our park development fund. We're counting that as part of that million. So it is very confusing, and I will try to redo that sheet so that it's not so confusing.
Okay. So I wasn't the only one that noticed it then. Huh?
No. Really what's happened is the council's plans have sort of changed with the economic conditions, and often it's, parks are one of the first things, to get cut. So.
Okay. No, at Gladstone thing there, I can't find the page. What do we got planned over there too again at the Savannah and that?
Mr. Martin, Mr. Martin, did you want to expand on that one?
Sure, Chair and Commission. So I'm not sure, it's not the Savannah itself, I don't believe.
No.
The dollars that are identified in the capital improvement plan would go towards site assembly and purchase of properties for redevelopment. So most notably, the city in the recent past has done that with the Moose Lodge and the Gladstone House, and we're leveraging those properties to try to spur redevelopment projects. So the council is identifying additional need to do that. So it's in the plan that we would move forward with continuing to try to purchase additional properties in the Gladstone neighborhood for redevelopment purposes.
So the project name for that is a little bit confusing. Mr. Thompson changed it to redevelopment, just in case the city council would decide that it may not be the Gladstone neighborhood, but another neighborhood that they would prioritize. But the project described on the detail sheet is the Gladstone project, and that's been in the plan for several years. And again, probably not going to move along as fast as the city council wanted under the current economic conditions.
Paul, it's on page 19.
Okay, I found it now. Yep. So then again, there it says 5 million, and we've got 2 million. Is that where's the other 3 million? Then is that?
Well, Chair and Commission, so the 5 million is the identifier of what it would take if the city was going to buy everything it wanted and kind of store it for redevelopment purposes. But the 2 million is what has been allocated towards that. So,
and so what happens, Chair and Commission, is the remainder of the 5 million falls outside of the 5-year plan. So at one point, the city had hoped to do $1 million a year in redevelopment, and with their debt reduction plans and with the economy, some of those plans got moved out. So they're still in there. They still have $5 million, but they're in years beyond 2025, so they're not showing up on this report.
Okay.
But the total project cost will still show.
Okay.
It's somewhat confusing, but when we do these plans, we do 10-year plans, but we typically only publish 5 years because 10 years can be just a little bit hard to project.
And overwhelming too, probably.
Yeah. Yes.
You can not this time around.
Would it be all right, Mike, if I asked your question, or should I just keep that what you and I had talked about the monies? Or is that?
Chair and Commission, if you have additional questions, now would be the time to.
Remember I had asked you about the money that we were putting into that? Is that a question I should ask or not?
Well, yeah, Chair and Commission, of course. I believe Mr. Arbuckle's question relates to if we purchase a piece of property for a certain dollar amount, does the city recoup those costs? And the general answer is yes, but it's also nuanced by the deal making that happens in place. So we buy property X for just say $1 million, and we have a developer that's interested in developing that site, but there's other site improvements that need to be made. So then it becomes a negotiated price where potentially, say, instead of selling it back for $1 million, we knock off 100,000 because we know soils need to be corrected, or there's going to be a TIF financing request. So the general intent, though, is from the city council and from city staff is that if we pay a certain dollar amount, we're trying to get that back. We're not turning around and selling property for $1 to a developer. That our intent is to make the city whole. But again, development, as the commission knows, can get very nuanced and complicated, and different financing sources are in play. And so we have to look at the total deal, not just the sale price for the property, to see where the council is going to be comfortable approving something.
No, I guess my other question on that too is, since it's owned by the government, will you be able to dictate a little bit more on who's able to purchase it, as in the difference, as in like a homeowner can't say, well, I don't want that person to buy my home. Is that so we have a little more control on whoever can buy it, in case Alan wanted to buy it?
Chair and Commission, the way the city has been approaching redevelopment situations, the council has 100% control who it's going to end up selling a piece of property to, or what developer it wants to work with.
Okay. So it's not a waste, then we do have control.
Mr. Chair, you can start me.
Yes, I can.
And
I know where you live.
Commission, I do want to make a point here too. That is a big reason why the city is trying to be aggressive. It's especially in neighborhoods like Gladstone. There were several other proposed potential uses for, like, say, the Moose Lodge building that would have kept the Moose Lodge building intact and, say, operating as like a flea market. And so that the city had an interest in making sure there would not be other interim uses in a property like the Moose Lodge, so that we can further our vision as a city for what should happen on that site, instead of kind of this interim use that could be there for 15 years because now we don't control it. So the city's ability to purchase some of these properties, especially the key ones, is a huge reason, because then the council has complete leverage on what happens next.
That's what it is.
Makes sense. Yep. Did anybody else have any other questions then, or? Lou, you good?
Yep.
I see Alan's waving his head no.
Good.
Well, thank you so much, Chair and Commission.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair and Commission, before we wrap this item up, the public hearing.
Yes.
So Mr. Arbuckle will open it. I don't see any members of the public on the call here that would be looking to speak, but I'd still ask Mr. Arbuckle to open and afford that opportunity.
Okay. So at this time, we are opening the public. If anybody had anything they'd like to interject. Is there anybody that's interested? Last and final call for you to dial up. Nobody's calling. Okay. Public hearing closed then.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we need a motion.
Okay.
I'll make the motion. Motion to approve the draft capital improvement plan by for 2021 through 2025.
Okay, there's been a motion by Lou. Second by Alan. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All hearing ayes, pass. This is just our recommendation, and this will go before the city council on.
Chair and Commission, maybe Ms. Pauls has a exact date already, but I believe it's towards the end of the year when the council will make.
In December.
Adoption.
Yeah, in December. I seen that in December.
They will review it again before December, but it will be adopted in December 14th. Thank you.
Okay. And those workshops that they have, that's just for the council. Like before this, we're not allowed to go to those in here, or what? How? Because that's kind of like their meeting, isn't it? With the
Chair and Commission, those are all public.
Okay.
They're all public.
So if we wanted to hear more about it, we could go to that.
Absolutely.
Okay. But I think I got all my info filled. Okay. Thank you. Okay, we are on the number 2 amendment of the city plan unit development ordinance. Staff?
Chair and Commission, tonight we have Laura Chamberlain from Hoyson Kegler, who is our city's consultant working on some various zoning updates, and one is the plan unit development. Before I hand it off to Laura, I just want to give a little preamble here as to this was identified as an issue. The city of Maplewood has always processed plan unit developments as conditional use permits, and then there's kind of a vague reference in the
Mike, your microphone is really, really chattery. It's hard to hear. Is there a way you could?
I try to mute and come back. We'll see if that makes sense.
I hear you.
Anything? Can you hear me?
I can hear it. Yeah, it's just hard.
Okay. So I'll make it brief, and then we'll let Laura the meat of it. But essentially, right now the city processes
It's even worse.
conditional use permits, and we're working to transfer those as now rezonings. The Planning Commission's review does not change. You still have an opportunity to review every plan unit development request and make recommendations to the city council. So we can get into more of the nuts and bolts of that, but with that, I'm going to ask Laura to start her presentation and walk you through the proposed changes tonight.
Okay, Laura.
All right, thank you, Mike. Can everyone hear me? I'm using headphones, so I want to make sure that the mic is also working.
Perfect.
Okay, wonderful. Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this evening. I am going to share my screen. Let's make sure this can work. Okay. All right, so this evening we're looking at proposed changes to within text of the zoning ordinance that addresses planned unit developments, otherwise called PUDs. And tonight there's also a public hearing regarding these ordinance changes. As Mike had said, these are these amendments to the ordinances come from needs within from city staff, as well as looking from the comprehensive plan update, noting that the city is updating other elements of the zoning code at this time. And so this is a good time for us to sort of clean house as far as procedures go. PUDs are an effective tool that allow for development that gives some flexibility and variability, in particular on challenging sites. But with that flexibility comes an emphasis on design and layout. PUDs are often seen as a way to kind of bring together the subdivision process and the zoning processes together into one site design for specific properties. Currently, the city processes PUDs as conditional use permits. That process involves a public hearing and then is approved as a CUP via resolution with conditions for the PUD recorded. Because it's a resolution, sometimes the exhibits of the PUD itself, for instance, the site plan or some of the setbacks, things along those lines that maybe differ from the standard zoning are not as easy to find. And over time, depending on when the city recorded them or filed them or whatever, some of those elements have become difficult to keep track of. So this is our opportunity right now to clean up that process and make it easier, in particular for staff, and then in way of for the Planning Commission and City Council to make sure that the elements within PUDs are enforced and continuing and able to be recorded effectively. So the approach within the ordinance that you received in your packets is, in general, shifting the CUP process to a rezoning process. This has, the reason to do this is for a number of reasons. The first being that a rezoning process is considered an amendment to the zoning ordinance. As such, it would be adopted via ordinance rather than by resolution. It is considered a legislative act rather than a quasi-judicial act, and thus gives the city more capability to interpret the rules on that. Further on that idea, the rezoning process will be shown directly on the map, and then the specific new PUD is intended to have its own specific, maybe 1 or 2 sheets within the zoning ordinance, where all of the conditions and other elements related to the enforcement of the PUD would be listed. And we'll be going through that a little further. Because this shift from CUP to PUD is resulting, there are so many existing PUDs that are being enforced through a conditional use permit. We don't want to take away that what has been granted to those property owners in the past. And so instead, we would, through this process, rezone all of those existing PUDs to what we're calling the Planned Unit Development Fixed District, or PUD-F, where the planned unit development, the PUD as exists today, would be able to continue with all of the conditions as approved previously. And if they want to amend that PUD significantly, then they would have to go through the process again and establish a new PUD district that would be a rezoning district. Another element that we want yes.
Laura, can I interrupt you for 1 second? Does that mean that if they want to do an addition or a remodel or something, they still stay under that standard, the F, or do they have to go to the 1 then if it's?
So if it's not a change to the PUD itself, so if there's a remodel on the interior or a minor addition that was part of the entire PUD, as long as they're still meeting like the setback standards of the existing PUD or the use standards or any other elements established in that original PUD, then they won't need to go through the amendment process. It's if it was a phased PUD, for instance, and they've developed the first 2 phases, and now the 3rd phase, they want to shift from townhomes to multifamily. That would be considered a major amendment to the PUD, and that at that point would have to go through the PUD process anyway. Under the current, under your current code, it would still need to go through that process, but this time going through the process would turn it into a zoning district. Yep. And as Mike had said, we do want to emphasize that the process from the Planning Commission's standpoint and really from the applicant's standpoint is almost exactly the same. The same application materials are required on the applicant side, and from the Planning Commission and City Council side, there's still a public hearing with the same notice requirements. The Planning Commission will have the opportunity to discuss and give a recommendation to Council. The only real difference is that instead of having a list of conditions within an approving resolution or tied to the CUP, it would be, those conditions would be decided and written out within an ordinance that is then codified into the zoning code. One more element before we move on. It is required by state statute that PUDs located within the shoreland are approved through a CUP process. And so we have added provisions to distinguish general PUDs or PUDs outside of the shoreland and then shoreland PUDs. What is considered a shoreland PUD is any PUD that is within the shoreland, and also really any development that has 3 or more units of, I think it's 3, maybe it's 5 or more, units of housing proposed for development on one site. And so those have their own state required rules that we have to go through, and that would have an additional CUP on top of it. But we would do that at the same time.
Do you want me to wait till the end to ask any questions, or is it?
No, actually now is probably a good time to talk or to walk through that, or any questions that you have.
Okay, because on the shorelines there, the 50% open space, is that kind of pretty restrictive, or is that going to be an issue? I mean, because that seems pretty low. I mean, if you got an acre, another acre has to be open space.
Yeah, it's so that is for, sorry, I'll have to pull that, the actual standard up. Typically, the open space requirements within all of the shoreland requirements are to ensure that that not too much development or too much intense uses are within the shoreland area and directly impacting the things like soil erosion and the shoreline stabilization and water quality. And as well as some issues of visibility from the water itself. And I would have to look a little further to make sure that if that open space requirement is exceeds what the DNR requires in their, or what state statute recommends in their model ordinance. But I believe that that is language from your existing code. And
Commission, to give a sense too, the shoreline overlay affects areas that 1,000 feet out from lakes, essentially. That's the general idea of where the shoreline overlay is. And in most of those areas, you can only have from 30 to 50% of impervious surface to begin with. So there is pretty strict restrictions already in our code about how much you can build up on a site within 1,000 feet of a lake.
I thought it was at 60, but maybe you say it's less, huh?
There are a couple areas where there's a provision if you meet further stormwater control standards that have to be approved by the city engineer, you get a bonus that can, in a couple, like in one classification, I believe, that can get you up to 60%. But generally, it's going to be that 50% or lower percentage.
Okay.
Did you say 50% or more?
Less.
Yeah, Chair and Commission, generally in a development that's within 1,000 feet, that's with, so you're in the shoreline overlay, you're going to have 50% or less impervious surface.
Okay.
all right, any further questions on the shoreland element? We'll have some more time to discuss that later as we go through some of the specific sections. But just wanted to continue the sort of broad overview before we get into the details. So with the establishment of these new PUD, individual PUD districts, they would be probably numbered PUD 1, PUD 2, etc. From the date of adoption, every new one would start that series. And then that new section that would be added to the code for each adoption would include elements such as the legal description, approved plans or official exhibits, permitted uses and accessory uses, lot and site dimensional standards, and then any special provisions, for instance, if there's additional landscaping requirements or different sign requirements are allowed than what your standard citywide provisions allow for. So each of these, depending on the complexity of the site, would probably be about 2 or 3 pages for each district added to the code every time. So before we get into the different sections of the ordinance that was included, does this process make sense as far as an approach to administering these PUDs?
I think I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
The question is that in the definition of PUD itself, are we talking about 100% residential district, mixture of development, or what?
Yep. So PUDs can have a mixture of uses. It depends really on what the underlying comprehensive plan land use is guiding the site for, and to a certain extent to the existing zoning of those sites will also probably be a starting point for staff to start writing those standards, and anywhere that it varies from those standards would likely be brought up within the presentation to the Planning Commission for as you're walking through these. Additionally, there are some there are examples of PUDs in other cities, and I apologize, I'm not as familiar with Maplewood specific existing PUDs, where half of the PUD is maybe similar to your R2 having twin homes and townhomes, and then the other half of the site is commercial and residential mixed use. So even different parts of the site can have their own regulations within it. It doesn't need to be applied to the entire PUD, but all of that would have to be listed out within the ordinance. And technically, all of this information is already listed out within the PUD documents. It's just it's a matter of them being recorded with the city in and codified within the zoning ordinance, so that staff know exactly where to look and there's no confusion of, well, there wasn't a rear yard setback established on that sheet, so do we have to go to the underlying zoning, etc. This makes it all just very clear.
So to be able to accomplish all those things you have described, the PUD will have to be located on more than an acre of land.
Yes, that is an existing, I believe, an existing provision of your existing PUDs.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Chair and Commissioner, just the minimum lot size and what Paul was mentioning, the open space requirements and the shoreline overlay, as Laura mentioned, those are existing policy requirements in our ordinance. I just looked up the shoreline where it does require at least 50% open space for in shoreline PUDs. That's today the requirement. What we're looking at tonight is not changing any city policy on the particulars that are already in place. Where, as Laura's mentioned, we're trying to have a more standardized and more efficient way of recording these approvals in the end, so that planner who's in this chair in 10 years is going to be easily find projects that were approved today. And we don't, just as a side note, we don't expect this to increase or decrease the amount of PUD requests we already receive. It's just how we process them and the mechanism for they get recorded.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it won't be more restrictive. It'll just be more detailed, so they understand what needs to be done. Is that correct?
Yes, the regulations will be laid out mostly more just in a different spot within your existing ordinance or within your code, and then it will be easier to reference back to. For instance, if a neighbor wants to know, well, what is the setback in that neighboring PUD? It's a lot easier to find that information because it will be part of your online code.
But for the existing PUD, right?
For any PUDs going forward, any of the new ones adopted under this rezoning.
So for the new PUD, then what will be the, how do you measure the flexibility that PUD is supposed to create if there will be no change to the existing one?
No, there is.
Well, he just said that this is just to identify.
No, he didn't say that. He said the shoreline. He said the shoreline was.
Yeah, Chair and Commissioner, I'm sorry if there's confusion. We're not changing any of current standards in the ordinance. We're not proposing to change those. But yes, PUDs provide flexibility from like a setback. So if an ordinance like the shoreline says in a residential PUD, you got to have 50% open space. We're not proposing to change that. But in a PUD, you can ask for flexible setbacks. So instead of the building being set back 30 feet, you're asking for 15 feet.
Exactly.
There's still that potential to be requested, reviewed, and then codified if the council ultimately wants to approve that. So the function of the PUD is not changing as well. So there still offers that ability to have flexibility from most zoning standards.
All right, I'm going to quickly run through our the different ordinance sections that are within the ordinance that was attached to your document. Section 1, these are showing very minor changes to the existing, amending the definition of PUD and then adding a definition for shoreland PUD so that we can make that distinction between shoreland PUDs and general PUDs. Section 2, this adds to where in your existing ordinance you have a table that establishes all of the zoning districts. This would add another table establishing PUD F, the PUD fixed district, as well as any subsequent new PUD district as special zoning districts. That way they will be referenced not only within the code where they are, but also in that list of districts. Section 3, this is existing language that your R3C townhouse subsection talks about eligibility as for PUDs. This only is changing the reference number of where those regulations are kept within the code. Otherwise, the standard still stays the same. Yep. Section 4, this is kind of the meat of where the ordinance comes in. This is a new division and adding, or I believe it's division 15. And this is where the descriptions of both the PUD fixed district and the overarching purpose of new PUD districts are, as well as reserving space for future PUD, PUD1, PUD2 to be added over time. Section 5, this is your existing conditional use permit process section, a description and process section, and we have removed the requirements from this section regarding most PUDs, however, keeping in those references for shoreland PUDs that were necessary. Section 6, this adds the new language regarding the process of adopting PUDs through rezonings. And this is within your existing amendments and changes, I believe, article, adding a new specific addition for rezoning for a PUD district. And the process remains pretty much the same, but now with a rezoning, there's, we want it to make sure that it reflects the language that you have in your existing rezoning, but also including all of the elements that would normally be needed for the PUD.
Question, I have a question over here.
Yes, yep.
I'm just wondering this language, if it is the right language or if that is how things work. Over here on B, on page 6, it said the applicant shall also, at the time of filing such application, pay a fee to the Director of Community Development. Is that how it works? Or they pay to the city?
Yes, that, so I believe this is existing language. So within your, within what you're seeing, that anything that is not underlined or strike through is existing language that will remain. I believe that references to the community development, or the Director of Community Development, probably within the definition section, say, or their representative at the city. So typically your administrative staff will be the ones actually taking that filing fee.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So number 4 on there too, section 4 there, that's our new district there is going to be the one that's at the north end at the mall, right, Mike? Is that kind of where that leads to?
You mean at the north end?
Yes, number 4 establishes inspectors for PUD district in the new district number 1, because we're going to have that new district at the north end there by the mall, right?
Yeah, Chair and Commission, we're working on a creation of a new zoning district. That itself will not lay within the plan unit development ordinance. That will be its own standalone, like business commercial district is a zoning district in Maplewood. So we will have a new north end zoning district that will have its own standards that we'll talk about a little after this item tonight. But it will be separated from the PUD ordinance that you're reviewing right now.
Okay, so that's not that number 4 there then. Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
All right, and just to finally wrap up the different sections of the ordinance that you see that was included in your packet, section 7 are the changes within your shoreland district standards, changing any reference to PUDs to specifically be about shoreland PUDs. Otherwise, the policy within there remains the same. It's just adding the name shoreland PUD to all of those references. So with that, that's my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions. And I know that we have the public hearing and discussion, and then you can take action on that.
I'd just like to say that the draft is very, very comprehensive. I think it's well thought of, and it includes most of something, although they are existing, but under different name. And it's very, very comprehensive. And I'm pretty sure that as time goes on, there will be some additions to these as we move on. You know, I'm pretty sure about that, because I still have some underlying questions that are not featured over here, but this is not the right time to ask those questions unless you have the application, you know. And I believe that most of these questions over here will be reduced, because I think I read over here that an application will be guided by the staff, you know, right from the beginning, if they are doing that. So some of this will be pointed out to the applicants. It will reduce some, you know, up and down and up stuff, you know. Yeah, it's detailed. I mean, I guess it's detailed. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Now, is this a pretty standard, the additions with a lot of the cities nearby us too, that has been kind of added?
Yes, so there has been a recent trend with cities transitioning from the CUP process language to the rezoning process language for some of those reasons that we talked about at the beginning. And a few cities, notable cities that have had a lot of success with this, City of Edina and City of St. Louis Park, they have had many of their PUDs done through this process. And if you really want to, you can go on their websites and find out all the details of every single PUD that are in their districts, what uses are allowed, what the setbacks are, etc. And so it can be a lot, it makes the process much cleaner and easier to follow for staff as well as any interested public.
So that should cover pretty much every issue that comes up is already kind of detailed in here then, because it's already been planned and practice.
Mm-hmm. I have a question, just to kind of help me put this in an abstract way. So with East Shore Drive being next to Lake Phelan and those being residential properties, would a PUD, would somebody be able to come in and buy 4 or 5 properties, tear those down and build another shores, for lack of a better thing, overlooking the lake, if the council agreed?
I might ask Mr. Martin to address that one. Yeah, thank you.
Well, Chair and Commission, the key fact there is council approval is required on anything. in that specific example, because of its proximity to the lake, you're going to fall into shoreline overlay requirements where we already know half of it has to be kept as open space in a PUD. So that's going to make it more difficult. You know, four or five residential lots, it's going to be difficult to do that type of development that I know the concern would be there. And furthermore, the biggest takeaway is, I know Laura mentioned comprehensive plan guides, trumps and rules, everything. So John, on most of those properties along East Shore Drive are going to be they're going to be guided low density, where the shores is guided high density. So unless the council was going to give 4/5 approval to re-guide it as well, no, they wouldn't be able to do that. And that's not a function of the PUD, that's a function of your comprehensive plan with density. So that protects neighborhoods from drastically changing more than any other mechanism. It's the comprehensive plan.
Okay, thanks for that. It just makes it a little bit easier.
Yep.
Anybody else have any other questions? Tashar, Lou, Alan?
No.
Is there anybody on public there that needs to, anybody online, Mike?
Hearing Commission, it does not appear that anyone has called in to participate in this public hearing, but much like the last item, I'd ask that you present the opportunity.
Say that again?
No, there isn't, but if you could allow people to have this.
Okay. Okay, so the public hearing is open if anybody'd like to speak. Somebody's smoke alarm is going off.
Yeah.
Batteries are dying.
Yes. Who's the guilty one?
Are you asking? It's you.
Nope.
Okay.
Not me. I think it's Mike. He laughed. Is there anybody else that would like to speak? Call in, chat, last call. Seeing none, we close the public hearing. Okay, we need a motion.
Yeah, I'll make a motion. Approval of the amendment to Chapter 44 zoning to establish new procedures for planned unit developments.
There's been a motion by Deshar. Second by John.
Second.
You okay with that? Second by John. Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any nays? Hearing all ayes, is passed. This is just our recommendation, and this goes before council on
Tentatively August 10th.
August 10th. Okay. We are, thanks, Laura. Thank you. That was.
Thank you, commissioners.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura.
New business. Any new business?
Hearing Commission, no, there are no new business items.
Okay, we are at G at unfinished business, the North End zoning district.
Hearing Commission, I will, Jeff Miller from Hoisington Kegler is here tonight to continue our discussion on the North End. I'll just preface it by saying there's no action required. We're not presenting anything for the commission to vote on, but just continuing the discussion of the development of the North End district. And with that, I will hand it off to Mr. Miller.
Chair Commission, my name is Jeff Miller with HKGI. I work closely with Laura on this. Can everybody hear me okay?
Perfect.
Perfect.
I'm going to try to,
Mike.
yeah, I know. I'm going to share my screen and see if this works smoothly. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Great. So last month, Laura actually was at your meeting, as you remember, and started this presentation of the new North End zoning district and the discussion with you all on that. As was mentioned before, this is intended to be it's being designed as a new base district, not part of the PUD. So as you can see on the screen here, the intent right now is that this area would be rezoned to the North End zoning district. I guess I don't know for sure, but probably proactively. So first, the new district will be established and adopted into the ordinance. And then at the same time or after that, at some point, land could be rezoned to this base district. It would not involve a PUD. So like in your meeting packet, you should have had a preview of some of the information that I'm going to cover tonight. And hopefully you had some time to review that in preparation for when I'm going to present. I'm going to kind of present two things. So very briefly, I'm going to give an overview of the North End zoning district, and then I'm going to go into kind of a general description of the types of standards that would be in this district, and then lastly, a more specific description of proposed standards by street type, and that's where the numbers are. And so in your packet, there is a table or a series of small tables with some standards that had some numbers in there. So I'm going to cover that. That's probably the meat of tonight's presentation. So the brief overview is, as I said, the North End zoning district will be a new base district. Not unlike the mixed use district that the city has in its ordinance today. This one is intended to be more of a form-based district, which means the focus is on the form of the development, the site development and the buildings, and secondarily on the uses. So I'm going to first, at the last meeting, Laura gave that overview, and you talked mostly about circulation and access standards. So things about the streets and the blocks. And I believe you had a brief overview of some of the building placement standards. I'm going to go into detail on the buildings part of this new district. And then just as a reminder, you saw this last time and it's in your packet for reference, but the new zoning district is really based on identifying street types within this redevelopment area. And you can see how those have been classified on this map here. The one thing that we've added is not all of the local streets that will be in this area, hopefully, are shown on here. They're to be determined. But based on the master plan that was done, an example is where the Birch Run Mall is, this area here, that could be up to 9 smaller, kind of like city-sized blocks. It might not be 9, it might be 6 or, something less than that. But the master plan laid out that large area would be broken up into blocks through redevelopment. So I'm not going to go into that too much more, but the standards are by those street types. So the general standards I'll go through kind of quickly, and your questions and input are welcome tonight, of course. But if I can, I would like to try to get through the general standard descriptions and then open it up to any questions. And then we'll go into the tables that are at the end of the packet that you received, where there's the actual numbers, and I'll describe those actual numbers and then get your input on the specific numbers. So the intent is first to just make sure all the standards, the intent of them makes sense. So first one is building placement, they're all fall under building placement and form standards. The first one is build to zone, so the difference is to the typical setback standards that are in zoning districts is that there's actually a minimum and a maximum setback. So the graphic here is showing the blue that the minimum is the front line and the maximum setback is the back line. And the building just needs to be placed within that zone. There's not just a minimum. And that could be different on the side if it's a corner lot as well. The build to zone, the purpose of it is to establish an interactive relationship between the buildings and the streets in this redevelopment area. It's intended to be space for outdoor activities. It's a transition between public and private. It's private property. It's on the property, but in many cases there's public access to it. And if you're on that street, you probably would not know exactly where that property line is in many cases. So another intent is that there's a synergy between the public sidewalk and the landscaping, and then this build to zone between the building and the sidewalk. The next one is street frontage. So what's shown in green is the minimum. It's the minimum percentage of the street frontage, or the along that property line, that needs to be occupied by a building. And since there's a build to zone, it doesn't mean that the building has to be up to the property line. It just needs to be within that build to zone, a minimum percentage. And we'll talk about what that percentage might be later on in the presentation. The next one is off-street parking placement. And the intent is that this district will require that parking is either inside the building, underneath it, could possibly be on the first floor or above, or behind the buildings, or in some cases on the side of the buildings, but not in front of the building. The idea is that on-street parking can be leveraged, hopefully. And at this point, we don't know what the streets are going to be, but when you talked about this last month, I know that on-street parking is part of that conversation. As these streets are designed, that on-street parking will be a part of those streets in the future. And then it's also considering vehicle access points. In general, you don't want to have too many curb cuts in a neighborhood like this, which is a negative to making a pedestrian-friendly and a more walkable neighborhood. The next one is building height. And so the graphic is showing that the district will have both a minimum and a maximum height. So that's a change from most districts, where traditional districts just have a height maximum, not a minimum. The next one is upper floors step back. So the yellow is showing that at some floor, the district would determine that the floors above that would need to be set back or stepped back a minimum amount. It might be 6 feet or 8 feet. The intent is that the height of the building will seem lower for people that are on the street. So you can get more density, but it won't feel like it's higher density. And these are some examples of what that looks like. So the one on the left, I think we see this the same. This one here is an example on Grand Avenue, and it's a 4-story building, obviously. This one is stepped back after the first floor. And if you know Grand Avenue well, Grand Avenue is quite a mix of building scales, including single-family homes. So that's one example. The other example is the upper floor is stepped back at the 4th floor. And you can see even behind there, that's probably like the 7th or 8th floor where it steps back. So it could be whatever you think is appropriate for this district, and we have a proposal for that later in the presentation. The next one is building width. It's the maximum width of a building along a street, and we'll talk about the numbers of that, but the intent is not to have buildings that occupy the full block, and you can't permeate them, and they overwhelm the street. Next one is the entrances, and there's 2 standards that we'll talk about. One is about each street frontage is required to have a principal entrance on it. And then if it's a larger building, there's a maximum spacing between entrances. So, you know, if it's a long building of 200 feet, there can't just be one entrance. There has to be multiple entrances. The next standard is building articulation. And what that means is a break in the facade along the street frontages, not the rear or the side. And the highlights are showing that those articulation methods could be recessing the building, like the entries, which are in yellow. Up on the upper floor, they could be balconies. They could be projections, the blue shown on there, or the red, they could be horizontal projections. Just ways to break up the building so it's not a really flat surface. And then these are a couple of examples of how developments have done that. These actually are both in the Twin Cities. The first one's in downtown Hopkins. You can see how that building has projections and recessed areas. And even awnings can come into play on that. And then this one is in St. Louis Park at Excelsior and Grand. And the next one is building facade transparency, or windows and doors. And the standard would be a minimum percentage of the frontage needs to be transparent in the form of a window or a door. So that's a lot of things. Good news for Maplewood and for your review is you do have a mixed use district that has some of these already. So I'm not sure how familiar you are with that district and how much it's been used, but what I'm showing you here is that in the mixed use district, there is a build to zone standard. There's not a minimum street frontage. There is off-street parking placement as a standard. Of course, there's a building height maximum. There's not a building height minimum in there, as far as I saw. Upper floor step back is new for Maplewood, I'm guessing. Building width maximum's new. And then over in this area, spacing of entrances would be new. But these other ones, there are standards of this nature in the mixed use district already. So that's the general overview of the standards. So if you do have questions or comments about that you'd like to share now, I'd like to open it up to that. And then any types of standards that you think might be missing that we should be thinking about, feel free to bring those up as well. And then after this, the next thing would be I'll go through the numbers that we proposed and were included in your meeting packet. So is there any general questions or thoughts about what I just went over?
Are the projections in the setbacks, or are they couldn't encompass into the setbacks?
The projections would be subject to the setbacks.
Okay.
Yeah, they could. They're not intended to encroach into the setbacks.
Okay. Go ahead, Alan.
I was just asking, will the setback include a kind of what do you call this thing? Alleyway? Should, in case the parking entrance is at the back, as you indicated earlier.
So I'm sorry, your question is the alley part of the setback?
Yes.
So the alleys, I think you might have talked about this a little bit last week. The alleys would be, I think in Maplewood, what we're talking about is they would be private.
Okay.
They would be private, not public. That could still be a discussion, of course, but they would be, I think they would be part of an outlot. So when you plat the block or the lot, you would plat an alley as a separate lot. So it would not be part of the setback. It would be a separate lot as part of the development.
Well, you do have a rear setback of 5 feet. So yes, that would be, they do have a rear setback.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. but she is saying that it's going to be private. So when you plat within a city block, it means that based on the size of the building, accessibility might be an issue, or you have to maximize the number of buildings that we go in within a block, a city block.
I don't understand what you're saying.
Okay, you have a city block that you want to develop, and you want to have certain number of buildings within the building block. If the parkings are going to be through the back, how would they be? How would they access? How would they be able to go in there and park?
Oh, I see. Yeah. So whether it's an alley or not that goes all the way through the block, an access into a parking area would, let's see. It would be within the setback. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
If it's a driveway. I'm sorry. I thought you were asking if it was an actual alley that goes from one end of the block to the other one. That actually could be a separate outlot, but it could be within the block and within the lot and be part of the setback. Yes.
Well, most buildings in Maplewood don't have alleys. I mean, it's grass or the next building. Because they're only going to have 5 feet. You got 10 feet between the two buildings. They're not going to have an alleyway through there.
Well, not when they are saying that the parking, the access to the parking will be at the side. It's specifically saying that over here now, so that there will be no on-street parking, because what you have just indicated is like they're going to build to the curb.
Yeah, you could not have parking in front of the building. So to get to the parking, you will have to have an access drive.
Exactly.
Beside the building or behind the building, depending on how big the building is. Yes.
Exactly.
Most would be on the side, probably not on the back.
Yeah, it would depend on whether the developer is, developing a full block, multiple blocks,
exactly.
A portion of the block. That's what we don't know at this point. In some ways, if somebody comes in and develops a really large area, it's easier for you to work with because then you have the full picture. But if somebody comes in and wants to do just one block, that's what you have your plan for, and then the zoning to say, okay, here's what we're trying to do. We don't want blocks to be really, really large, so there's going to be, standards for that, and also where the parking goes, so that if it's a half block, the person that develops the other half of that block knows what they're working with.
Exactly. That is exactly what I'm trying to point out.
So when they develop lots, what is the typical width? Because if you're maxing out at 250, does that leave any variance on the side much, or is that just depending on how big of a lot they buy? I guess is there any connection between that, picking that number, that 250?
The building width number, 250?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. When we get into the numbers, the logic of the 250 is that we're looking at a block size, typically, again, based on the master plan, which lays out what the city would like the blocks to be and what size they would like them to be. They won't be exactly that size, but the typical block is expected to be about 500 feet long. And so 250 would say that the standards are to prevent a full block being one building, but rather would be half of that. So that's where the 250 logic is coming in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense. My only other addition would be is that the first floor be some type of masonry unit or something, so that if they decide to have riots, that they can't burn it, or some kind of security system on that first floor to make it safer for the structure of the buildings.
Yeah, we can talk about exterior materials when we get into the specifics. Right now, I'm just going to show you what you have for the mixed use district, because you already have those materials identified in the mixed use district. So, our approach right now is to have you look at those and say if there's something you don't like about those.
Okay.
rather than start from scratch on those.
Sure. Oh, when you're talking about that district with where you lined it out with all the different squares in there.
Yeah.
And our master plan originally on that west corner there is where we had decided that we were going to put the hotel there, right next to St. John's there.
Right.
So you wouldn't probably be able to put a 250-foot wide hotel there because that's pretty narrow for a hotel, isn't it?
That's a good question. These blocks are based on that plan, so that hotel would have fit in one of these blocks. So that should.
That's where our plan was to be in that area. I know that. I was on that plan. So. Yeah,
I'll verify that, but what we're showing on here is based on that master plan, and that shows the hotel in the corner there. So, but I'll verify that 250 is not too restrictive for a hotel.
Well, the hotel can do it 250 times 2.
You can't though.
Any other questions or comment about the general before we get into the numbers?
So is this where you can't have same business or same building occupy 2 blocks?
You could. I can't remember what we landed on for a block size, and I don't know if Laura, if you're still there, if you have that information, but there is a maximum block size, and it's bigger than what these are showing.
Mm-hmm.
It would allow, less than 9 blocks, but I don't think it would allow less than maybe like 6 blocks to, so flexibility for the developer or the property owner to do what makes sense for the market, but still requiring that there are, walkable size blocks. So I think the maximum that we're looking at is I want to say it's in the 650 range or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just pulling that up right now. I can get that for you real quick. Yeah, so the existing plan, or excuse me, the vision plan showed blocks that were around 300 feet, and we were recommending a maximum around 450 or 500.
Okay.
So, for instance, the measurement between the St. John's Boulevard extension and Beam Avenue, so that lower part, that's 700 feet approximately. And so with a minimum of 450, or excuse me, a maximum of 450, it would have to be split into at least 2. And again, the width of that area is around 1,250, and so that would have to be split into 3, possibly 4. Did that math make sense? Sorry.
Now you were talking about the whole development of Birch Run there, right? That those numbers that you were telling
Correct.
us.
Yes. Yep.
Because it seems like it's bigger than that, 1,200.
That's the width. Yep, of between South Lawn and Kennard. So the Birch Run portion.
Or the depth of it there, yeah, not the width.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, because the width.
So I think the master plan, does the master plan show 4 blocks across that width, Laura?
Let me pull that up.
I think it does.
Sorry, I have to get my printed copy out.
We researched what standards are in other cities for walkable blocks, and that 450, 500 area is kind of a typical standard that cities are using to prevent blocks from getting so large that it creates a neighborhood that's not very walkable. So
you don't need super blocks. No.
Yeah. So, we're not, if we went strictly with what the master plan showed, we could say the maximum is 300. because you want 4 blocks across that. I think it was 4, but we realized that there should be some flexibility there. And so we looked at, what are other cities using as maximum block lengths for creating a walkable area?
Well, I think 4 blocks will limit the development for that prime area over there. Yeah, I think so. 4 blocks.
So you could have a couch on the corner there. You could take a rest, and you could walk further the next time.
Yeah, and then we go out all the way to what do you call it?
McDonald's.
Yeah.
Lori, were you able to see what the plan shows?
Yes. Yep. So that southern portion is 4 blocks and then by 2 blocks. So that's how the vision plan set that up.
In that same area or over further?
Within that same area, by Beam, between Beam and St. John's Extension, and then Kennard and South Lawn, there are 8 blocks within that 4 by 2.
That seems pretty small.
Yeah. To limit the development,
Yeah.
That's a prime area.
Yeah.
That we anchor that place, or should anchor that place. Yeah. Well, let's move on.
One element, Jeff, if I might, to kind of address what you were asking about before of limiting the parking access, or because these blocks are going to be subdivided around the same time, or kind of maybe block by block, but we'd have provisions within the code and within this district specifically to make sure that one future property is not cut off from access to internal circulation or parking lots or anything like that by another property, maybe developing all the way to their property line, or, so it would have to be designed with the development of the area in mind rather than just parcel by parcel.
Yeah, really. Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, why don't we jump into the proposed specific numbers, and then we can continue to take questions and your input. So the way the district is going to be set up is that by street type, there will be standards that are differentiated. Not in all cases. In some cases, they don't need to be different, but really looking at what types of streets the city would like to create in this new neighborhood. So this is the street typology we've been talking about. So for build to zone, what we're proposing right now is that the neighborhood internal streets, those small streets, have a build to zone of 15 to 25. So the reasoning there is that those buildings are most likely to have residential on the ground floor, and you need some kind of transition space between the sidewalk and that ground floor living unit. So 15 feet minimum, but not too far back either, so 25 feet maximum. The neighborhood main streets, which if you go back to here, the key one is St. John's Boulevard being extended across, having the smallest setbacks to allow buildings to be up close to the street. So the minimum would be 5 feet, maximum 15 feet. And then the other streets, the local connectors and the major, minor arterials, major collectors, having larger setbacks. We haven't talked about this, but there would be minimum side yard and rear yard setbacks, like you have in most other districts. We're proposing 5 feet for those. In looking at some of your other non-residential districts, I do realize or we realize that some of those districts do not have, they're zero. So, I mean, that is a possibility, through discussion with you, that maybe you don't even need the 5 feet, but in a lot of districts that we've looked at in other cities, the 5-foot setback is pretty common. So that's a small setback. So that's what we're proposing. For street frontage, and again, that's the green here, we're saying that, and I'll start with the neighborhood Main Street, because those are the streets where you want the strongest relationship between the new buildings and the street. So along those streets, the minimum would be that 80% of the property line has a building within that build to zone. So in the case of the neighborhood Main Street, we go back here, 80% of that frontage has a building between 5 and 15 feet from the property line, or the sidewalk probably. And then we step back or step down from there to the bigger streets, it's 60%. And then in the neighborhood streets, it could actually be less at 40%. Off-street parking placement, the standards would be to not permit parking between the front of the building and the street.
Yep.
And then on the neighborhood Main Street, also not permitted in a side yard. So it has to be behind the building or internal to the building. Minimum building height, we're saying 2 stories. Maximum building height, we're saying 6 stories, 8 stories along the beam and White Bear, mainly because when you did that plan, the plan talked about the hotel probably needing to be higher than 6 stories or 8 stories. We have or none as a question mark, because actually in your the current zoning there, I believe there is not a maximum building height. Of course, you're not seeing those tall buildings in that area yet, I don't believe. 6 stories, is a typical height that we see in, walkable neighborhoods that are being redeveloped. So I think that that's a good number. But the 8-story, you could say that you don't want a maximum height there if you wanted to, but the plan talked about needing to go up to 8 stories for a hotel. That 6 stories would be too restrictive. Upper floor step back, you can see that we're proposing different numbers along the Main Street above 3 stories, and then along the residential internal streets, anything above 2 stories gets stepped back. So it's more like that Grand Avenue example. And then on the bigger streets, you step back at a higher level. And, this is one of those standards that developers won't want you to do it any earlier than you need to, because that's, you're taking away some square footage on those floors where you're stepping them back. So it's not going to be their favorite standard by any means. But, on the other hand, it's allowing them to get higher buildings too, which does give them more square footage. Then the maximum building width we have at 250 feet. I'm sorry, was there a question?
No, I said they just charge more. They call it a penthouse. You pay more for penthouse.
Yeah, right. It's outdoor space, private, up above. Yeah. The next one is the principal entrance placement. It's the same across the board, is that any street frontage is required to have a principal entrance facing the street, not the parking lot. And then maximum spacing of entrances along a street frontage is at least every 75 feet. So, if the block is, 500 feet, it's going to be like 4 entrances or 5 entrances, something like that. next one is minimum street facade articulation. And there's a minimum of how often that needs to happen. You know, more on the residential and the main street and less frequently on the bigger streets where the traffic is higher, and a little bit less pedestrian oriented than these other two street types. Minimum street facade transparency, the highest along the main street where you want mixed use buildings with active, hopefully retail or restaurant or service businesses along those main streets like St. John's Boulevard was identified in the plan, less on the residential streets, and then kind of in between on the bigger streets. And then the last one is the exterior building materials, and this is exactly what's in your mixed use district today. So I don't know how familiar you are with those materials and those percentages, but that's what we weren't going to reinvent the wheel on this, but use what was in the mixed use district if it was okay with the Planning Commission. So hopefully that's not too much to cover, but want to open it up if there's questions or comments about what was proposed in the meeting.
My thing is always the height of these buildings. You know, when you get into these 8 stories, it says above the 5th story. I think it should be down to about 4. I don't think it should be up that high, because you're getting 5 stories where you're starting to get that shadowing effect or the tunnel effect that you're going through if you're going through the streets there. And my other question was on the if you have that building that's 250 feet and you got a door every 75 feet, that works out to be 3 1/3. Is that doesn't mathematically, do they have to have a 4th door in there then, or how is that going to work?
Because it's not, yeah. So what would that be? 75, 150, 225. Yeah, you'd have to have 4.
So maybe that should work out mathematically to work out with a 250-foot building to have 3 doors.
Yep, we can look at that. Other questions or thoughts about what's in these numbers?
I think that from my kind of point of view, it may be hard to see it, but if you have 2 buildings that are 6 stories, but then 1 building in between that's 2 stories, I mean, I don't know if there's requirements to, you know, with the neighboring buildings and things like that, that has to be written in.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a tricky one. I mean, we have seen standards where this gets into being overly restrictive with developers in some ways, but there are some standards that we'll talk about. Building height needs to be within 1 or 2 stories of the neighboring buildings. You know, that starts to get tricky, because that then is set by the first developer, and the second developers, you know, may feel like they're being penalized by what that first developer decided.
It gives the character. Different heights give character.
And you can't restrict it in the sense that you would also have difficulty selling it if you start restricting it. Because a good lesson that we learned in Maplewood was the legacy village development. If you saw the grand plan that was created 10, 12 years ago, we really didn't quite realize the complete grand plan because of a lot of the restrictions that were put in place. Even in that plan, there was a plan for a hotel, an office building, and all those things, and that all just did not materialize. So in my mind, some flexibility has to be left out, or you're going to have patches of real estate that will go undeveloped because we have put restrictions in it. And we are going back to this North End development now, when Legacy Village was really almost part of this whole type of development that really did not succeed as well as it is, because where you've got the Olive Garden and so on, that's where all the hotels and office buildings and everything was going to go into play, and that didn't materialize. So I think there needs to be some flexibility in how we pose this whole program to potential developers that come in the door.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what we're striving for. So if it feels like some of this needs to be more flexible, please feel free to identify the pieces that you think we need to loosen up on.
Well, I brought it up at the last meeting regarding the same area, regarding the fact that now that we have COVID and now that we have people who are afraid of using mass transit, we really seriously need to consider parking options into this layout somewhere along the line, be it underground, be it above ground, put up a parking ramp, whatever makes best sense for these people to be able to say that we are still welcome if we have an automobile. Because this walkability thing, again, like I said, I've been on this planning commission for almost 20 years now, and I keep hearing that same jargon of walkability, but we are not anywhere walking, including Gladstone area that has been put up as a dream of making it a walkability area. It just is not going to materialize rather readily as people think it's going to be. So if you want to sell real estate and you want to develop, parking's got to be considered up in the front end.
So, yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think right now these restrictions are not, at this point, restricting the quantity of parking. So I think in theory, somebody could build buildings, and as long as they're meeting these standards, there's nothing on here none of these are requiring you to build a certain percentage of a block with buildings other than the frontage. So, there's a math thing there, the dimensions of a typical building and all that. We could look at that a little bit closer. But if you look at the plan drawings or illustrations that you completed prior to this district, a lot of the blocks actually look like they're buildings on the streets, and I would say pretty sizable parking areas in the middle of those blocks. So I think we're preserving opportunities for developers to put in the parking they want to. Of course, with residential, I think it's even easier because a lot of residential, the market wants that to be internal anyway. So, that doesn't limit the development, that type of development that this is looking for. I think the more challenging would be if somebody wants to come in and do, say a sizable commercial building, 1-story or 2-story, say it's 2-story somehow because that's the minimum we're showing here, but they don't want to do any structured parking and they want to max out their parking, that they might run into problems doing that. But I would say your plan wasn't looking for that kind of development. It was looking for multi-story buildings not single-story commercial buildings. Not that there won't be some of that, but that's not what the plan is showing.
Okay.
Why do the setbacks have they have minimums, but they don't have a maximum? Like the minimum side yards is 5 feet. They don't have no max on there that they can. Is that too restrictive there too, or what's?
Yeah. I mean, the only reason that there's maximums in the built to zone is to ensure that the buildings don't get placed too far away from the street. Because what can happen today, as you know, I mean, there's not maximum setbacks. So somebody can come in and whatever the minimum is, it doesn't matter if they want to put whatever amount of parking in front of their building, because they're going to meet the minimum for sure. So this is preventing, it's helping prevent the, parking going in front of buildings anyway, but also having buildings be up closer to the street. So it feels like when you're living there or shopping there that, this is a walkable area where the buildings actually relate to the streets.
But that could be the problem, because there's a minimum and then the maximum. They could put it way back from there.
With the 25 or 30? You mean?
Yeah. If I may, I think with the relationship between the build to zone and then the minimum side yard and minimum rear yard, the intention isn't necessarily for the building to take up the entirety of like a square of the block or of the parcel. The intention is for the building to line the outside at the street. And so it would be up to the developer to decide how much of that kind of inner square would have to be dedicated to parking or other things in order to accommodate what the market wants. But if the property owner wanted to build all the way to the lot line in the back, we would want to make sure that, okay, there's at least a 5-foot buffer there. But not setting a maximum allows for that variability on the side of the development to figure out how that sort of rear yard internal circulation and parking and maybe common open space for residential areas, et cetera, how all of that would be laid out. And, we don't want to get overly prescripted on our end.
Yeah, and just to add to that, along this minor arterial major collector, so that's just Beam and White Bear Lake, I think. Is that right?
Yes.
So, where is it? There. The 30 feet, with that, we're not, it's not preventing some parking being in front of those buildings along Beam or White Bear Lake. So we're not, this area is, the intent is for it to be walkable, but not necessarily in the same way along Beam and White Bear Lake. So, I mean, if you feel like that 30 is too big because you don't think there should even be parking placed along Beam or White Bear Lake, then that 30 probably could come down to 25 or 20 or something like that. But the intent is that you could have one row of parking in front of the buildings along Beam and White Bear Lake, and that would be okay.
Yeah, I don't think it matters that much. Did anybody else see anything? I think that's fine. Like Tashar said, we don't want to be too restrictive.
Yeah, really. Unless we send them to Clarence.
Bring it on.
Anything else tonight?
I think I'm fine.
I think we're all good.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thanks, Jeff.
You.
Thanks, Laura.
Thank you.
Mike left. I think he went to sleep. Wake up, Mike. Mike, wake up.
Mike said he had enough of us. He's going home.
Yeah, he's got to drive. He's got to drive out this a ways out. So.
Yeah. So let's move on with our meeting.
Yes,
Okay. Any visitors presentations? I see none. Commissioners presentations. None.
None.
Staff presentations.
Mayor, Commissioner, I do not have anything further for you tonight.
You have nothing?
Nope.
Okay. You have to get your microphone fixed, though, Mike.
Yes, so, yes.
I move for the adjournment of the meeting.
Okay, there's been a motion by Alan. All those in favor?
Second.
Nay. Nay.
Yep. Goodbye.
Good night.
Bye.
Right.